What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. Today I've got something a little bit different for you. I built 4 different landfall decks. Now these decks do share the same core. The goal of the deck, very similar, and it's sharing a lot of very similar cards. But we're going to differ in the 99 depending on what commander we're playing. A lot of commanders have some very niche cards that are very good and specific to that commander. So we're definitely going to run those, and additionally depending on the commander, these decks are going to win a little bit differently. So it's just going to give you guys some insight on how my deck building changes depending on what commander is helming the deck. So it's very valuable information on how to change up decks depending on commander, and additionally just gives you some insight to my brewing overall. So if that sounds like something you want to get into, let's shout out those patrons and get into it. Irrelevant, you rock. Additionally, if you guys want a free $15, you can click on that whatnot link in the description down below. You get free money, helps out the channel. Additionally, you can always like, comment, and subscribe if you are enjoying the content. Now, this video's layout is going to be a little bit different. We're going to go over the overall goal of this deck, the core of it, if you will, and then we're going to go over the intricacies of each commander's deck and, you know, the cards that differ from the 99 of all the other decks. Again, I am trying out something new. This is going to be a little bit of a new format, so if you guys like seeing a bunch of decks all at once and then going over the differences of them, please let me know in the comments down below. YouTube with YouTube, any kind of feedback is extremely valuable. Now, let's get right into it. The core goal of these decks is to utilize bounce lands to activate all of our you may play additional land cards. I think every deck is on at least 9 or 10 of these you may play additional land cards, and it's just not feasible to be able to, you know, get all the value out of those every single turn. So the way we're going to be doing that is with bounce lands and fetch lands, and the ability to play fetch lands from our graveyard. So now we're able to utilize to the fullest potential all of those you may play additional land cards. There's 15 of them at this point, and I tried to include as many as possible, or at least the ones that made sense for each individual deck. Now, another thing we're going to be including is stuff like Amulet of Vigor. That way we can play those bounce lands. Those bounce lands are going to enter untapped, we tap them for mana, and then we throw them back into our hand. As long as you have 2 bounce lands, you can kind of do that as much times as you want, and you're getting mana value out of it whenever you're doing that. So the rest of the deck is made to abuse this interaction. We're playing your ACs, your Tatiovas, your Horn of Greeds, anything that gives us card advantage whenever we're playing lands. Additionally, we want to be playing cards like Tireless Provisioner. That way we're getting value in the form of ramp as well. Lotus Cobra, even this is amazing here because there's a lot of very impactful elementals such as Onna Locus of Rage. This is going to be a key part and the way some decks win, and additionally just getting a lot of 5/5s is going to be a problem for our opponents. Another thing that we're going to share amongst all the decks is we are running Paco and Haldan. I like these cards because, again, it's impossible to keep up with all of these you may play additional land effects because eventually you just run out of lands. What I like about Paco and Haldan in these decks is we're going to be able to play our opponent's lands, ensuring that we never run out of lands. Very useful. Additionally, you're going to notice a common wheel theme. There's not a lot of wheel cards in these decks, but we do need to utilize wheels because if you run out of lands and you have a lot of playing additional land effects on your battlefield, you need to just pitch that hand, draw into more lands. That way we can ramp up faster. Additionally, I know there's a drawback to wheels, right? Why would I give my opponent's card advantage as well? But it's kind of more disruption than card advantage, and additionally, we're going to get more value out of it than our opponents because we have more lands on the battlefield, you know, if everything's going correctly. We're also going to be playing Sword of Feast and Famine amongst all of the decks. Whenever you're playing a landfall strategy and have a ton of lands on the battlefield, this card can effectively feel like an extra turn that also just allows you to hit like a truck. So we're definitely going to be playing that. I also wanted to include a normal ramp package like your Birds of Paradises, your Bloom Tenders. A lot of these cards have a lot of colors on them, so Bloom Tender effects are going to be amazing. And the reason we want to be doing that is whenever you're including 9 or so of these effects that allow you to play additional extra lands, you can't really think of that as land ramp, because if you have 4 of those on the battlefield and 0 lands in your hand, it's ramping you a 0 amount. So I did include a normal ramp package to ensure that the deck does work if we don't have any lands in our hand. hand. But 9 times out of 10, let's hope there's lands in our hand, right? That's what we want. I also wanted to include stuff like Springheart Nantuko. Putting this onto a creature that allows you to play additional lands can kind of go infinite in the right scenario. This is kind of a Rube Goldberg machine, but let me explain. If we have 2 bounce lands, right, already 2 cards deep, Springleaf Nantuko on a creature that allows us to play additional lands, and that creature cannot be legendary. And then we have something like Amulet of Vigor. What's going to happen is we play a land, we can tap it for mana immediately, and bounce lands traditionally tap for 2 mana. Then we can go ahead and activate Springleaf Nantuko's ability, allowing us to get another creature that allows us to play an additional land, right? And then we bounce the other bounce land back to our hand. And then we can do that again and again and again, effectively netting us infinite landfall triggers. Again, that's a Rube Goldberg machine, and that's not the overall goals of the deck, but it is something I noticed when I was goldfishing these decks, so I thought I'd share it with you guys. The last thing we'll talk about before I get into the individual commanders and their differences in the 99s and how those decks win is this powerful interaction that is seen in every single deck, which is 6 and Life from the Loam. This effectively allows you to turn your entire graveyard into your hand just by discarding land cards. And then again, we are just playing a ton of land cards and a lot of ways to get land cards back into our hand, right? Now those bounce lands become recursion, and we're able to play those bounce lands from our hand and bounce more lands back into our hand. Again, it kind of just fuels itself. We're able to turn our graveyard into our hand this way, and doing that's just incredibly powerful, especially when we're on a lot of wheel effects. So now let's get into the first commander we're going to talk about today. The first commander we're going to be talking about is Yidris. This is one of my favorite decks, and honestly why this video existed. I put out a poll. I was like, hey, which life or which landfall commander do you guys want me to build? And everybody voted Omnath, and I've done Omnath already. So I was like, okay, we're going to ignore that. We're going to do 4 decks instead, because that makes sense, right? Right? Anyway, let's get into the differences. And this is going to be organized in creatures, sorceries, instants, and then artifacts, just because that's how Moxville organizes it, and I didn't want to go through and change any of that. So now let's get right into it. We're going to start off with the creatures, and the first one is Averna. Now, I really like this girl because now, whenever we're cascading with Yidris' ability, we just get to put lands onto the battlefield for free. Notably, that's any land you see that you fancy, throw it onto the battlefield, and you're getting free value off of the cascade trigger. Another one that we're also playing here is Bristly Bill. I didn't put this in or in other decks because we're not really focusing on the combat step, and we're not trying to make a creature massive, but ensuring that Yidris connects is pretty important to this strategy. So I thought, why not make him a little bit bigger? That way he's super hard to block and already gets through. Additionally, he has trample, so commander damage is very viable, especially when we're playing cards like Bristly Bill in this deck. The next thing we needed to include when we're talking about a Yidris deck is more protection. Yidris is very powerful. People do not want to let him connect. So right out of the gate, we're already playing Glen Elendra and Spellskite just for some added protection, ensuring that we can protect our commander a little bit better since this deck warrants that. We're also playing Marag. Again, I didn't include this in a lot of other decks because those decks aren't exactly centered around the combat step, but whenever we're playing Marag here, getting additional combat steps, very powerful because we're able to connect with Yidris even more, and each time we connect with Yidris, it adds another instance of Cascade to our hand. So the first extra combat step, it becomes Cascade, Cascade, and it just becomes pretty broken after that. Notably, I don't think you get an extra main phase after this, so it's only working for those instants and stuff, but it still can be pretty broken, especially when we have access to flash speed cards in the form of lands like Alchemist Retrieval, right? So we can still utilize it. It is still pretty busted here. Prosper is also going to see an inclusion here. Prosper is just too good in a Yidris deck not to include. Now whenever we're casting those spells from exile, we're getting more treasure tokens, allowing us to cast more spells, and then additionally it is a little bit of card advantage as well, so we're definitely going to utilize that. Moving on to the sorceries, this is going to be the biggest difference from Yidris and the other decks we're playing. We're playing Baral's Expertise and Rishkar's Expertise. Very powerful cards here. They give us advantage, they bounce our opponent's creatures, and they allow us to play more spells from our hand for free. When we're doing that, again, it's going to allow us to get more cascade triggers from Yidris. very good there as well. The next thing that differs is the cards with the suspend mechanics, such as Inevitable Betrayal, Profane Tutor, and Wheel of Fate. These aren't very good in other decks, but in a Cascade deck, they're amazing because they have 0 CMC. This means if we cast something for 1 CMC, we cascade into those immediately and can cast them right away without going with the suspend cost shenanigans. And then again, they're very powerful cards, right? You have a tutor, you have something that steals any creature from an opponent's deck, and you have a powerful wheel effect. Call Forth the Tempest also seemed solid here. We're already doing Cascade shenanigans. Why not include Call Forth the Tempest, wipe our opponent's board, and get more Cascade triggers? Blasphemous Act, very good here as well because the cost of it gets reduced, right? But on the stack, Yidris is still going to see that as a 9 CMC spell. That means we're still going to cascade for 9. Just very powerful interaction there with Yidris as a whole. Moving on to instance, we have Curtain's Call, kind of the same thing with Blasphemous Axe. This gets reduced, but we get the full value out of it, get it to kill 2 creatures, and we're cascading for 6. Delayed Blast Fireball, again, another one-sided removal spell for Yidris. We really love this here. It just wipes our opponent's board while leaving ours untouched and allowing us to connect freely with Yidris. Chromatic Orrery seemed pretty solid here. Yidris is 4 colors, so drawing 4 cards off of it and just allowing us to spend mana as though it was any color is pretty powerful in its own right, so it's going to see an inclusion as well. Robe of the Archmagi, very good here because we can equip it for Yidris for only 1, and then additionally, again, we do have ways to buff Yidris up a little bit, so we're going to be drawing a ton of cards whenever we connect with Yidris. The Great Henge, kind of same scenario as the other cost reducers here, plus we are on about 30 creatures in this deck, so we're getting good card advantage, good ramp, and it's cascading for a total of 9 instead of whatever we're actually casting it for. Last but not least, we have Canopy Covers. Canopy Covers just for some more solid protection for Yidris. This has become one of my favorite cards to use in those green decks to protect your commander that also cares about connecting, right? Because it gives him unblockable and the protection we need. Moving on, let's talk about Onna Locus of Creation. And this is where you're going to really see how these decks differ depending on what commander is at the helm. The first thing we're including that we're not including in Yidris is Ancient Green Warden. Why I like it here and not in Yidris is because our commander has landfall triggers, so we can ensure that we're always getting value off of this 6 CMC creature. Whereas if it was in Yidris, we're just crossing our fingers and hoping we have a landfall thing on the battlefield to take advantage of it. Another thing we're playing here is Avenger of Zendikar. Something you're going to see here is we did go with a little bit of a blink strategy here. Not only does that reset Omnath's ability, allowing us to get more landfall triggers and more triggers off of our commander, additionally, it's going to get us a card draw trigger whenever our commander enters the battlefield. Kind of a win-win here. We also do benefit off of the bodies, and I'll go over that a little bit later when we explain the other differences in the 99. Chulane, Teller of Tales, we're getting card advantage, we're putting more lands into play. That's exactly what this deck wants to do. And then additionally, we do have the ability to return creatures to our hand, and whenever we're dealing with ETBs, that's always just pretty powerful. Dead-Eye Navigator and Displacer Kittens, very powerful blink triggers. Displacer Kitten, very good because all we have to do is cast a non-creature spell and boom, we're blinking Omnath and drawing a card. And then Dead-Eye Navigator is only 2 mana in a landfall deck. That's going to be very easy to take advantage of and utilize. The next card we're adding to this deck is Hugs Grizzly. I really like it here, and let's be honest, it doesn't match well with Yidris. Yidris' next spells just don't interact very well, but this deck just produces way more mana than Yidris. So his ability in the X cost becomes very valuable here. We're able to exile a ton of cards off the top of our library, play all those additional land cards, and then additionally, Omnath's going to generate enough mana to play all of those cards next turn as well. So it's just going to be very solid here. Another very solid card that we're including that we didn't include in Yidris is Risen Reef. Risen Reef just does insane things here. When we're blinking our commander, we get a trigger. Whenever we create an elemental, we get a trigger. Notably, really busted with Onna Locus of Rage because now a land enters the battlefield and you get an elemental, so you get another trigger off of Risen Reef. And if Risen Reef uncovers another land, that land instantly goes onto the battlefield battlefield, triggering Omnath again. It can get really insane when you start pairing that with stuff like Ancient Green Warden, and then if we're able to create additional copies of Ancient Green Warden using something like a Springheart Nantuko, yeah, it just does some really busted things very quickly and can result in us winning the game. Another kind of pseudo strategy that I put in the Omnath deck is creating token copies of Omnath or non-legendary copies of Omnath. I just want his ability as much as possible. The life gain, the damage, the mana, all very notable here. So I am going to include cards like Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. We are also including Zkama here. We're generating so much mana, why not include Zkama? And then additionally, when Zkama enters the battlefield, if you cast it, it untaps all your land. So it's a free giant dinosaur that really controls the board by taking away your opponent's creatures, taking away their artifacts and enchantment. And it's just a little bit of way to gain life while smashing someone in the face with a 9/9 dinosaur. Yeah, we're going to be playing it in this landfall strategy. Moving on to the sorceries, I do like Awaken the Woods here. Just adding 3 of these to the battlefield triggers Omnath as many times as possible, getting us our mana, our damage, and our life gain. Earthquake spells, very powerful here as well because we're going to play 2 of them. The reason they're powerful here is because we're generating a ton of mana and we're gaining life with Omnath. So as long as we have more life than our opponents, we can put 20 mana into these earthquake spells, kill our opponents, and we're going to be alive because we have the most life at the table. Nanogen conversion, also busted here. Let's say we have 10 creatures on the battlefield. We turn all 10 of those creatures into Omnath. Then if we're able to trigger Omnath's third ability to deal 4 damage to each opponent, that's going to be 40 damage to their face, and we're going to win the game. Another difference here is I included Cyclonic Rift. It's just not that fun to cascade into with Yidris, and then additionally, we are easily generating over 7 mana with Omnath very consistently, so having that one-sided board wipe, very busted, especially in these heavy creature strategies. Helm of the Host, again, I want more Omnath. Or having multiple Omnaths is just incredibly fun and incredibly busted at the same time. Additionally, you have to think, whenever we're creating these token copies of the Omnaths, we're also getting the card draw trigger, right? Whenever it enters the battlefield. So we get card advantage, we get mana, we get damage, we get life gain, we get everything we want. Sword of Hearth and Home, again, we're getting that blink effect along with putting more lands into play, exactly what this deck wants. Well of Lost Streams, we're able to gain 4 life very consistently with Omnath on the battlefield, and then we can easily tap 4 mana to draw 4 cards, knowing that all we have to do is play an additional land, and boom, we're getting 4 mana back from Omnath's ability. Annie joins up, no brainer here, just doubling on all of Omnath's triggers. We're gaining 8 life, we're drawing 2 cards, we're adding 8 mana to our mana pool, we're going to go ahead and deal 8 damage to our opponents. It's just not going to be okay. Last but not least, I'm including Sylvan Library. Now this does just look like your generic good stuff card, but I really wanted more ways to utilize our life gain than just the earthquake spells. So including a very powerful card draw engine that you're able to easily pay 8 life into every single turn to get 2 additional cards is just value here. Moving on to our next commander, we're going to be talking about the 5-color Omnath. I'm a big fan of this guy because now we have black, so we can utilize the Gitrogs, we can utilize Thalia in the Gitrog or the domesticated Gitrog, whichever you prefer. I accept them both, but without further ado, let's get right into it. Chromatic Orrery, again, very notable here because we are going to be able to store all of that black mana. That's going to be important, and something you're going to notice as well, we are going to utilize Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. That way we can protect our commander more adequately. We do not want our commander getting sniped whenever we're floating 10 plus mana. That's just not okay. Scroll Rack, amazing here. We can set up the top card of, or we can set up the top of our library whenever our Omnath trigger goes on the stack. I do not know why that was so hard to say, but we got through it. Moving on to the creatures, Animar seemed like a no-brainer here. Comes down super early, reduces the cost of all of our creatures down to their pips, and Omnath's going to give us those 3 pips that we need to cast. Notably, I did want to talk about this for a second. There's kind of a miscommunication whenever it comes to Omnath's ability. It does not care if all of those pips are all red or green or anything. It works the same for something that has 3 green pips as well as something that has 3 different pips, like Animar, right? So I just wanted to cover that real quick. I see a little bit of confusion whenever I talk about this card. Attracts the Grand Unifier. This one, kind of just value, right? I mean, it gives you the 3 out of the 4 colors you need, then you play this thing, and it's a massive Vigilance life linker that's going to find us our key pieces. Notably, we kind of want to find Valros Stronghold in this deck. And this deck is going to be, again, more graveyard leaning because we do have access to those black cards. Elvish Reclaimer, again, we want Valros Stronghold, very powerful card in this deck. Corvold, Fey Cursed King, not only does this pair amazingly with all of our sacrifice lands, additionally, it's going to pair well whenever we generate fodder off of something like a Field of the Dead, right? Now we're just able to sacrifice those fodders to draw more cards. Sorry guys, moving on, we have Seedborn Muse. Why not, right? Now we're able to untap our lands on each of our opponent's turn and store a ton of mana. Now this can make you a target, but we're playing landfall here, so F it, let's become the problem. Thalion the Gitrog, again, gives us more opportunity to sacrifice creatures for card advantage, lets us play additional land, and kind of hoses our opponents at the same time. Does exactly what we want to do. We do want to be slowing our opponents down a little bit, because once we get online, we're going to be unstoppable. The Necro Bloom, just having the ability to create some fodder, and then additionally giving your lands dredge can be extremely powerful, especially in a graveyard deck that wants to fill the graveyard a little bit, get some bombs in the graveyard, and then put those bombs on top of our library using something like the Valros Stronghold. Titania, Protector of Argoth, again, we're more graveyard leaning here, so including her to generate those massive 5/3s whenever we sacrifice lands seems like a no-brainer. We're also playing Zkama here, again, synergizes with our commander, gives us the 3 mana, we're putting a ton of lands into play, so getting the ability to untap all of our lands, and then the ability to control the board whenever we have something like Zkama and Seedborn Muse out on the battlefield is just going to be too good to pass up, so we're going to be throwing that in the deck for sure. Annie joins up, solid removal, getting additional Omnath triggers, exactly what this deck wants, and it's also playing a decent amount of legendaries on its own right, so just including this, very powerful card. Haunted Crossroads, this is going to give us another way to put creatures on top of our library from our graveyard, ensuring that we're always getting that Omnath trigger. I'm also a dirty Smothering Tithe player, so we're going to be shoving that in the deck. Remember, we are playing some wheels, so Smothering Tithe and wheels, it does some insane things, and then additionally play this turn 3 or 4, and then we're able to very easily cast Omnath turn 5 without any issues with open mana. Not okay. Some unique cards that we're playing in this deck, we are on Call Forth the Tempest for different reasons. It has 3 red pips, so that's going to be amazing for our Omnath trigger. And then Reshape to Earth also has 3 green pips. So again, amazing for our Omnath trigger and synergizes amazingly with the deck's goal. I did want to talk about some cards that we're including in this deck that aren't exactly used for their front side, and that is the MDFCs. We have Agadeem's Awakening, Disciple of Freelease, Imri's Call, Seagate Restoration, and Turn Timber Symbiosis. Now, mostly, these are just in the deck to trigger our commander more consistently. I thought that was pretty clever, right? You don't pat yourself on the back. But additionally, these have some pretty powerful abilities. So maybe you have the mana, you can go ahead and cast these. If not, we just get free mana off of our commander and an additional land to play. Last but not least, we're going to talk about Golos. And yes, I understand Golos is banned, but I've come up with a pretty decent idea, I think, if you run into a play group that doesn't want you to play Golos. You just rip out your secondary commander, which is a lot more fun to play against, Child of Alara. I'm joking, of course. No one wants to play against this girl. She comes onto the battlefield, wipes the board repeatedly, and whoever has most lands on the battlefield is going to be ahead of everybody else. So it's honestly a pretty solid landfall commander. I will say though, you probably want to take out some of the play additional land cards, swap in some cards that allow you to give your entire board indestructible, and call it a day. Additionally, we can throw in some land cards that sacrifice a creature. That way we get a solid way to sacrifice Child of Alara on demand, wiping everybody's board. But let's go into the strategy with Golos. Right out of the gate, we are including stuff like Displacer Kitten. That way we are able to blink Golos and get more lands onto the battlefield. The next thing we're including is the graveyard strategies as well. We're including your Argoth, your Zkamas, your Corvolds, your Gitrog monsters, you know, the graveyard strategy that comes with the landfall package. We're including that here since, again, we do have 5 colors and have access to black. We get to play the Ruinous Ultimatum effects as well, well. That way we can wipe our opponent's entire board. Reshape the Earth works well here as well, since again we can cast it for free with Golos's ability. And speaking of that, we are going to include Seedborn Muse. That way we are able to utilize Golos's ability on our opponent's turn and get as much activations from him as possible. Putting more lands into play, untapping those lands, getting more Golos activations. Eventually, you're just going to outvalue your opponents and win the game. With that being said, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. This one was a little bit different, so I really want your feedback. Did you make it to the end? It's going to be one of my longer videos, so if you did, you're a trooper. I appreciate you. And again, yeah, I'd be down to make more of these in the future, but I need to hear from the community. Now, let's shout out those patrons. Irrelevant, the Professional Heal, Excessum, Creator, and Chicken Salad. You guys are amazing. I hope this helped everybody in their deck building endeavors, and I will see you guys in the next one.